friends, we proceed to our next speaker, and we are very fortunate to have a youth leadership development specialist from YouthLed of the Asia Foundation, Mr. Emil Tapnio. Emil has over 15 years of technical and management experience in designing and implementing interventions for youth leadership and political participation and social impact. With over $50 million in portfolio funding from foreign aid, international funding, and government projects. His areas of expertise include economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, education, and human rights, with a focus on youth political participation and social involvement. Please all welcome one of my mentors, Emil Tapnio. Emil, go ahead.
Maraming salamat, Jules. Maraming salamat at magandang hapon sa ating lahat. Let me just share my screen, okay? Yep.
Emil, please select the slideshow view.
Okay, yeah. There you go. Yeah, I hope you're seeing it now.
Yes.
Okay. Alright, so maganda at mapagpalayang hapon sa ating lahat. Maraming salamat sa mga kabataang nandito pa sa pangalawang araw ng ating Youth Leaders Summit. Bagong lahat, gusto ko magpasalamat sa Asia Foundation at sa USAID sa pag-i-implement ng programang Youth Leadership for Democracy or YouthLed. At ito ay napapanahon upang sa mga kabataang Pilipino na makilahok at makialam para sa ating kinabukasan. Nagpapasalamat din ako sa ating mga partners, ang Activist Center na matagal nang nakalubog sa sektor ng kabataan at nagbibigay espasyo sa mga isyong kinakaharap nito. Magpapasalamat din sa ating mga kaibigan sa Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Mindanao sa panguna ng United Voices Peace Network at sa mga leaders estudyante na hinubog ng Gerry Roxas Foundation. Sa mga kabataang hinulma ng LENTE upang kilalanin at ang kalahagahan ng pag-oorganisa sa iba't ibang kapuluan ng Pilipinas at syempre ang mahigit na 900 youth orgs sa parte ng Kabilang sa 2022 coalition ng YouthLed program. So sa araw na ito, I'll talk about the different sets of support in democratic governance, particularly driven by youth governance. So this very summit is actually an example of many platforms that are eased in for the Filipino youth. So again, I'm Emil Tapnio of the YouthLed program from the Asia Foundation. So sa next 15 minutes, sa susunod na 15 minutos, sabay-sabay natin kailanin muli ang iba-ibang forma ng pagkikilahok ng kabataang Pilipino. It's befitting that we start first with a snapshot of the Filipino youth and how they have always been at the forefront of pivotal points in our history. Let's also find out the best practices and challenges of the Filipino youth as they take up space and champion issues that are dear to our hearts. And after learning the context, let's check the pathways for support for Filipinos, which we believe are essential elements in youth engagement. And finally, let's all learn how we can take part in some of the avenues presented to our youth sectors. So, the Philippines today has always benefited from a long history of youth-led democracy building. The 1896 and the 1898 anti-colonial revolutions were led predominantly by young people. So hindi ko alam kung alam niyo ito, pero si Gabriel Silang, si Jose Rizal, si Andres Bonifacio, si Oriang de Jesus, si General Marcelo del Pilar, si Teresa Magbanua at Emilio Jacinto ay nasa 20s at 30s pa lamang sila when they were fighting for the Philippine independence. These young leaders were not only revolutionaries but also visionaries, and they've drafted the first constitution in Asia with the goal of establishing a democratic state. In the 1930s, youth and student protesters were inspired by the civil disobedience movement in India, choosing to boycott pro-colonizer establishments and refusing to pay taxes to what they deemed as an imposter government. At the age of 25 naman, si Luis Tarup led the Hukbalahap guerrilla operations against the Japanese occupants. After World War II, he continued championing for agrarian reform, and he struggled on behalf of the poor farmers, persuaded local and national leaders to strengthen the legal rights of farm workers, and led to a more equitable distribution of farmland. So tama yung sinabi ni Henry kanina na noong araw hanggang ngayon, ang mga kabataan ay powered by grit and by empathy, at pinapakita to ng mga kabataan, ng mga sinaunang kabataang Pilipino. Now, jumping naman to the 1970s, the 3-month outbreak of violent demonstrations, known as the First Quarter Storm, saw student unrest against the Marcos dictatorship peaking in January 1970. This period was also when a coalition of youth networks and organizations fighting a dictatorship emerged. So para sa mga kabataan na taga-Universidad ng Pilipinas, makikita natin na karamihan sa history ng ating mga organisasyon na ito ay nabuo actually in 1970s. At ito is example sa mga sinasabi ko. Finally, gusto ko rin ipakita ang napakagandang paglalarawan ng pakikilahok ng mga kababaihan. The re-emergence of women's movement in the post-World War II period was marked by the formation in April 1970 of an all-women's group, the Malayang Kilusan ng Bagong Kababaihan, with the inspired acronym of Makibaka, which is a Filipino term for struggle. So itong picture na to actually, ito yung mga female students na nakilahok sa strike ng mga jeepney drivers against sa pangungutong sa kanila. As the year goes by, the youth began taking spaces in various issues and forms. We saw more and more atypical students actively participating in student movements. So kung dati, kanina pinapakita ko na naging parte ang kabataan ng mga gandang punto ng ating history, itong mga next slides naman ipapakita ko sa inyo is kung paanong tinitake space ng mga kabataan over the years ang ibang-ibang issue na kinakaharap natin. So for example, itong nasa picture na ito yung nangyari nung EDSA 2. Having recognized as the greatest equalizer, students across the country called for higher state subsidy to education. In particular, was a call for at least 6% of GDP spending on education in a developing country like the Philippines. So to date, this call has been echoed again by the Vice President Leni Robredo as the most tangible way to capacitate our youth. Young persons with disability are now actively participating in their right to suffrage. During the 2013 Philippine midterm elections, we saw over 65,000 persons with disability voters in Cebu province alone. So itong nasa picture na to, ang pangalan niya ay CEI Antiporta of Cordoba, Cebu, and isa siya sa mga PWD youth who mustered courage to register and vote. Love is love. Equal rights are human rights for all LGBTQIA plus youth. Charoque and Imisi are longtime young couple who are raising their own family. With the renewed opportunity for the right to self-determination of our Muslim brothers and sisters, the Bangsamoro youth ensures their participation in BARM governance, and it is also very prevalent and how youth from the BARM region are also participating in our activities. By and large, the call for climate justice are pushed by more and more by the youth sector. So kung dati ang larawan ng pag-fight sa ating sa environmental issues before ay pagte-tree planting, ngayon mas nakikita mo na mas umaakyat na sa level ng policy reform na may kinalaman sa climate justice ng ating mga kabataan ngayon. So from the rich history of youth engagement and youth taking up space over the years, we experienced shrinking spaces and democratic backsliding. Growing disillusionment on politics and governance became prevalent. Weak rule of law, weak political ideologies and parties, and governance mechanisms at the local level that are marked by tokenism and political dynasties. The youth are presented with challenges that hinder effective political participation. Prevalent signs of disenchantment with democracy are also surfacing among the youth through a combination of disengagement with traditional democratic mechanisms and voicing out their concerns. So na-feel ito namin sa YouthLed over the past 12 months when we were campaigning for voters registration. Ang laging tanong sa amin, bakit? Bakit kailangan namin mag-register? Bakit namin boto? Parehas lang naman. So this current socio-political environment presents varying opinions on what democracy means for this country. This also presents 3 opportunities for collective democratic action among the citizenry, especially for youth engagement. So number 1 is youth leadership, second is youth coalition, at pangatlo is the civic education and engagement institutionalization. For youth leadership, this entails empowering and enhancing the leadership skills of young leaders in schools, civil society, and the private sector, which will increase knowledge and participation in democratic governance and encourage political participation, whether at a local, regional, or national scope. This includes an immersive type of upskilling, emerging young leaders to be the forefront of change, and also providing platform closer to the youth in a ground which allows for understanding their pulse, language, and needs. So kaya naman sa YouthLed, tayo ay gumagawa ng series of local youth assemblies nationwide. So, sa mga nagtataka kung sino itong nasa picture, ito ay actually si Ed Jop or si Edgar Hobson. So, I would suggest that you Google him. And this is actually a photo of him doing dialogue with the former dictator, Ferdinand Marcos. In terms of youth coalition, we have to enable the growth of empowered, independent youth constituencies with access to opportunities to engage in democratic governance activities. Capability training programs and participation in development of local governance policies will directly benefit the youth and the communities that they are engaged with and establish renewed ties with community and local governance structures. So understanding the youth's actual needs via training needs analysis before jumping into prescriptive training will generate buy-in from the youth themselves and will make the application of trainings more sustainable. So iniiwasan natin train lang tayo ng training pero pagkatapos ng training hindi wala na mangyayari. Kaya gusto natin na ang ibibigay natin ni training or capacity building sa mga kabataan ay nanggaling mismo sa kanila. In terms of youth coalition, we also have to capitalize na ang mga kabataan ngayon ay excited na bumoto. As of November 18, COMELEC projects nearly 6 to 7 million voters who are eligible to cast their ballots in the 2022 elections. Some 30% of that number are from the youth sector, ages 18 to 30, according to COMELEC's spokesperson James Jimenez. So mamaya marinig natin si Director James Jimenez to talk more about the current efforts of COMELEC. So let's capitalize on this pivotal number to swing the direction of our country. We already hit rock bottom and we have no way but to go up. In terms of civic engagement and civic education, an effective civic education program seeks to combine concepts of democracy, citizenship, and democratic governance with policy and action programs that will allow the youth to practice civic duties and civic engagement in their daily lives. The Philippine experience in civic education is teeming with best practices, both from the social intervention carried out by the CSOs, LGUs, and the private sector. And on the other hand, the academic intervention wherein the civic education from the academe is still seen as a potent way to instill values among the youth. So reassessing and representing to the public the civic education is crucial at this period in time. Now, these pathways will actually create generations of youth that are skilled on effective ways of engaging politically, are aware of the powerful impact of their collective voices, and are aware of their civic responsibilities. So all these we understand, and we believe that this will lead to a dynamic population of youth engaged in democratic governance. Now, the question now is, what's our next step? As far as YouthLed is concerned, and this is also based on our discussion with our partners, with the people on the ground, these are actually just some of the 7 areas or 7 things that you can look forward with YouthLed. The number 1 is the development of a national youth agenda. So actually, yung breakout session na ginagawa natin since kahapon at hanggang ngayon would be very important because the draft of the national agenda will be presented and validated back to you in the coming months. And we hope to present the National Youth Agenda to the next administration and when the next Congress opens. We also want to continually engage emerging youth leaders, starting with our lead fellows, as well as the young leaders that we have engaged in our local youth assemblies. We're also starting to implement capacity development for youth leaders in the different regional areas in the Philippines. And in fact, in the coming weeks, YouthLed is about to launch our sign up for capacity development in 11 cluster areas in the Philippines. So we're launching what we call CBCA hubs, or it's like a hub and spoke type, wherein the center of our entry points are in 11 regional areas nationwide. Pero yung mga kabataan na kapalibot sa area na yun would be the beneficiaries, of course, of this training. We're also asking you for the youth to support your local sangguniang kabataan in your area. Ang isang partner natin, yung LENTE at ang Hirayang Kabataan, ay gumagawa ng pamamaraan upang suportahan at mapalakas ang sangguniang kabataan sa area ninyo. So gusto natin na makilahok kayo dito. We'd also like to take advantage of the Project Citizen that we're going to implement under YouthLed, and of course the CB Cups, which I mentioned earlier. And next is we're also going to conduct voters education campaigns in your locality. So the past 12 months, we've conducted voters registration in different areas. We've reached millions of youth. Now we're pivoting towards voters education kasi gusto natin malaman na, okay, naka-register na kayo, so what's next? How are you going to choose now the next set of officials who would be the best ones to na maloklok sa tungkulan? And lastly, we want you to be vigilant with your elected government officials. Ang ating youth engagement, ng ating civic participation does not end pag nakaboto at nakapag-register at nakapag-boto tayo, dire-diretso yan hanggang sa pagtingin kung ang mga elected officials natin ay tama ba yung ginagawa. Okay? So, lahat ng ito na diniscuss ko ngayon at diniscuss ni Henry kanina, ito lamang ay pagpapakita na may pag-asa ang mga kabataan actually to be a citizen na inaasahan natin na magataguyod at magiging boses para sa atin. Itong picture na to na nasa background, lagi nyo nakikita dito, pero actually, ito ay picture ko nung kabataan when I was in Sorsogon Pilot Elementary School sa Bicol. Konti lamang ang mga pagkakataon na binibigay nung panahon sa mga kabataang tulad ko, pero umaasa ako na sa mga kabataan sa generation nyo ngayon na marami ng platform at marami ng pagkakataon, marami ng opportunities. Sana'y take advantage of this para naman mas maganda at mas maging kapakinabang ang mga kabataan natin sa generation na ito. So yun lamang po at maraming salamat.
Alright. Maraming salamat Emil Tapnio sa pagbabahagi ng iyong malawak na karanasan siyempre sa civic engagement. Okay, so kanina sinimulan ni Emil na talagang ang kasaysayan yung nagpapatunay na talagang napaka-aktibo ng youth movement ever since, 'di ba? At hanggang ngayon, iba-iba lang yung mga issues na pinagdadaanan kada panahon, pero talagang ang malinaw diyan, aktibo mula sa kabataan nanggagaling yung lakas talaga. At iba-ibang issues yan mula sa democracy, sa education spending, equal rights for LGBTQIA, sa Bangsamoro man yan, sa climate justice, talagang aktibo ang mga kabataan. Emil, may mga questions lang tayo. Una dito, ano po ang advice nyo sa mga kabataan na nahihirapan maging advocates and youth leaders dahil tutol o worried ang kanilang family members o di kaya na may tinututulan ng institutions or schools nila?
Okay. Well, unang-una, wag mong hiwalayin ang advocacy sa kung ano ka. Okay? Dapat tignan mo yung sarili mo, look at yourself internally and tignan mo kung ano yung closest sa'yo. Kasi if you take an advocacy or championing an issue na labas sa passion mo, mahahalata yun at na hindi ka passionate. So, una mong gawin is look at yourself internally muna. Sa experience ko, malapit talaga ang usapin ng issue ng edukasyon at human rights sa akin. So, bit ko yun mula high school, mula kolehiyo hanggang ngayon. At naging madali sa akin yung pag-advocate noon. In terms naman of explaining sa magulang or sa mga institusyon na kinabibilangan natin, para sa akin, napakadali na i-explain yun. So, for example, ganito. The past 5 months kasi nasa Bicol ako, I was taking care of my mom and kasi nagkasakit siya. And then, tinatanong niya sa akin, sabi niya, no, tawag niya sa akin, no, bakit si ganito ang iboboto mo? Bakit hindi ito ang iboboto mo? So, like kung sinasabi sa kanya, gusto ko na after a year or two, gusto ko na mas mapapagamot kita, gusto ko nang maibigyan kita ng mas magandang pamumuhay at magagawa ko lamang ito kung mas mababa ang tax na binabayaran ko. At mangyayari yun kung halimbawa itong person na to ang mayuluklok sa gobyerno. So basically, it's really looping them in on the conversation and the narrative. Huwag mong ihiwalay na yung advocacy na yun ay para lamang sa'yo. Tingnan mo rin kung paano na-involve mo ng magulang mo, ang eskwelahan mo. If you talk about, for example, the school, kung halimbawa hindi pinabawalan ka ng school, I would suggest that you set a dialogue with them. You can tell them that if you vote for this person, which actually spouses for better budget for education, that would also allow for your school to be able to implement to exercise academic freedom. So those are just examples of what they can do.
Thanks, Emil. Ayan, so make it more relatable doon sa mga kapamilya natin kapag nagpapaliwanag tayo. At huwag masyadong agresibo kasi syempre kapamilya nyo pa rin sila para mas makinig sila sa inyo. Okay, salamat Emil. Isa pang tanong, wala po akong organization. Saan po ako magsisimula?
Okay. So, merong tinatawag na konsepto ng volunteerismo or volunteerism, right? For example, sa YouthLed, kanina sinasabi ko yung KKK or Kabilang Kas 2222 coalition, but we're actually accepting volunteers. So that's something that we could offer to you. You don't have to look far actually. You can look at your local community. Tignan mo kung merong volunteer opportunities. Kaya sinasabi ko kanina, suportahan niyo ang Saguniang Kabataan sa area niyo kasi that's isa yan sa pinakamalapit na way para makilahok at ma-involve, right? pwede mo sabihin na sa sangguniang kabataan na, guys, wag naman puro basketball or paliga lang gawin natin. Yung mga gandang ideya na alam nyo, pwede siyang dalhin sa mas malapit lang sa inyo. So yun, yun isang mas example sa pwede nyo gawin.
Okay, basa lang tayo ng ibang mga comments. Sabi sa Zoom, we need policy reforms to empower the youth. Without the proper mechanisms, will not empower the youth. It starts with education and community. Emil, siguro when we're talking about policy engagement, no, usually nagiging intimidating na to agad for other people kasi naalala ko yung college days natin, Emil, sa NC. When we're talking about policy, hindi lang pala siya pagsusulat lang basta-basta ng policy, as in may math din pala to. Okay, pero when we're talking about policy, ano yung easiest way, siguro yung initial jump start na makabataan natin para makabahagi sila sa policy making?
Okay. So, when you talk about policy, na minsan parang big word sa atin yun, di ba? Akala natin ang policy actually ay law or bill, right? And that's too far out. Sobrang taas niya na. Ang policy kasi or policy reform starts with a conversation or being part of the conversation. Katulad na sinabi ko kanina, yung Youth Leaders Summit na ito, this is actually a start of a policy. Isa sa mga output na iniisip or gustong gawin ng YouthLed is to actually draft the National Youth Agenda, which we hope to present to our next administration to be considered para sa kanilang Philippine Development Plan, or pwede ma-present natin sa next na Congress. Now, minsan inisip natin napakalayo na nun, di ba? Parang magiging parte nun. Pero actually, if you'll be active sa conversation ngayon, mamaya magkakaroon tayo ng breakout session. Kung ibibigay todo nyo yung mga naisip nyo, ibibigay todo nyo yung experience nyo, i-share nyo yung mga local experience nyo, that is something that we wanted that we'll get from you. Kanina, before ang summit na ito, may kausap ako sa Viber. Sabi niya sa akin, Kuya Emil, bakit ako mapasama sa usaping ito? Sabi ko, kasi ikaw ang may local experience, ikaw ang may ground experience, di ba? Anyone could talk about theories, pero yung respective ground experiences nyo are very important na maging parte, maging ingredient ng binubuo nating mga policy reform. So yun, taking part in this conversation is very important, as simple as that. So yeah.
Thanks, Emil. There's another comment from Michael. Sabi niya, I believe it's also important to look at government culture as well as policy changes. Siguro I wanna focus on government culture, especially to those who want to join the government. Kasi the reality is, Emil, syempre, the government has more than 1 million employed na Filipinos, di ba? One of the biggest employers yan. Pero ang ilan sa observations ko siguro, Emil, working with the government before, kapag regularized na minsan or permanent na ibang positions, minsan parang wala nang drive to reach excellence kasi permanent na sila eh. So may nagiging complacent na, nagiging mediocre na minsan. Tapos kapag yung mga baguhan, yung mga bata ay nagsasuggest ng mga bagong reforma, parang pinapatahimik na lang kasi baguhan pa lang naman sila. So how can the youth actually propose changes in government na mapapakinggan at mai-implement, hindi yung noted lang?
Okay. Natawa ako sa example mo, Jules. Pero actually totoo yan. Ever since I graduated from college, I've always worked in the development sector, wherein we work closely with different government agencies. At minsan yun yung napapansin ko rin. Tama ka na ang kultura kasi na yun mahirap mabago, pero I think it starts with unang-una sa mga government agencies na ang head ay elected officials. Of course, that starts with voting the right people, right? That starts with voting the people whom you think reflects your values. Kung tingin mo gusto mo ng excellence, by all means, iboto natin yung mga public officials na excellent din. So yan, nag-start yan sa ganyan. Also usually kasi mga elected officials after they get elected, they would also have some sort of like a town hall discussion at pwede kang makilahok doon, mag-contribute ng yung mga suggestion kung paano mabagong kultura, ano yung ina-expect mo na what do you call this, na ano yung ina-expect mo sa opisinang iyon. Sa mga government agencies naman na parte ng executive department na ang head ay not necessarily elected once, you would be surprised, guys, that sending feedback forms, sending your feedback, sending your comments on the conduct of these government agencies actually work. At least nung nakaraang administrasyon, nakita ko, for example, ang DSWD, they've totally listened to the voices of the people. I remember back in the previous administration, I was part of a different organization back then. Wala pa ako sa Asia Foundation noon. We were registering that organization as a bona fide NGO, and natakot kami kasi sabi namin parang hala baka hindi kami pakinggan. And then true enough, hindi kami napakinggan nung first few days. Pero we actually sent an email to the office of the late Secretary Dinky Soliman, and we were surprised and we were called for a discussion a week after. So guys, wag kayong matakot, wag kayong mawalan ng loob na hindi kayo pinapakinggan ng gobyerno kasi may darating panahon talaga na may mga tao makikinig sa atin. So tuloy lang ng tuloy ng na pag-submit ng ating mga changes. Saka meron naman tayong mga advocates, meron tayong mga champions na nasa loob ng mga government agencies na ito. So yun.
Okay, Emil, thank you. From Darwin naman, sabi niya it's time na talaga to reclaim our spaces. We should mobilize each youth leader to change the dynamics of the current trend in the politics and strengthen SK reform law of 2015. I know, Emil, YouthLed has been closely working with SKs across the Philippines, no? So if you could compare SK before and the SK right now, what are the changes and may potential ba talaga siya to really change the political landscape?
Yes, for sure. So yes, una-una, Jules, sagutin ko lamang. Ang YouthLed we're working closely with an organization called LENTE. We're actually working in 100 barangays nationwide to strengthen the sangguniang kabataan. Now, in terms of your question of how different back then at ngayon ang SK, I think yung mga kabataan ngayon mas attuned sila sa mga ginagawa ng ibang SKs. So mas because of internet, mas nakita nila ano mga pwede nilang gawin. So ini-implement agad nila yon sa kanilang constituencies. Mamaya ang isang YouthLed lead fellow, si Shane Solidum, isang SK chairperson sa Bacolod, will also share her experiences. But gusto ko lang ipakita na maraming mga proactive na SKs ngayon ang gumagalaw. Hindi na lamang sila nagkakasya sa pagpapaliga, sa pagpapa-clean and yung mga pagwawalis-walis, pero mas active na sila, for example, sa pakikilahok sa local youth development council, sa pakikilahok sa pag-contribute ng mga how can they improve their local government units. So yun.
Thanks, Emil. As we wrap up, message mo ulit sa mga leaders natin nandito sa Zoom at sa Facebook. Go ahead.
Okay, so kanina binigyan ko kayo ng technical aspect ng programa, right? Ng YouthLed, ng mga vision ng Asia Foundation at USAID. Pero on a personal note, gusto kong kayo ay managinip uli or dream again. Ang pangit ng Tagalog, managinip uli. I'd like for the Filipino youth to dream again, to start dreaming again. Huwag tayong magkasya so kung anong nakikita natin sa harap natin. There's more to what you see in front of you, right? Along with dreaming again is always, wag nating i-lose yung quest for excellence. Sa lahat ng pagkakataon, gawin natin yung maganda, yung magaling. Ano yung mas makapagpagaling sa atin? In the coming days, in the coming months, marami tayong marinig ng mga nakakampanya sa atin. Iboto nyo ako, iboto nyo to. Pero gusto ko na pakinggan niyo yung puso nyo. Kailangan aligned yung sinasabi ng mga public officials na to, ng mga kampanya sa pangarap natin. Okay? Kaya gusto ko na mangarap ulit tayo ng mas magandang bukas. So, yun lamang po. Maraming salamat.
Thank you so much, Emil Tapnio. Let's give him a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much, Emil, for always inspiring youth leaders and aspiring leaders. Maraming salamat po.